Okay, going to try to go live here, and I just noticed something the other day, and I just wanted to make a note of it, maybe. Right. Um, so let's go to the example here. It's Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal. This is the reason why evolutionists believe, and if you can explain this to an evolutionist, they will just they'll just blow their mind. They have nothing left for evolution. But check this out. And sometimes we talk past each other, and this is one example of talking past each other. Hello, Dookie. How you doing? Good morning. Happy coffee. So let's go here. I gotta click this again because for some reason it didn't work. So yeah, here we go. This is a response by Dan Stern Cardinal. It's him not understanding me and me not understanding him. This is the result of what he said. So we're talking past each other. Neither one is understanding what the other is saying. I'm saying that makes the only possible mechanism for evolution even rarer. That's because the mutation is the only possible mechanism, and the mutation is very rare, and it's only the germline mutation that's passed on to the next generation. So the only thing is, this definition, this word evolution right here, is what confuses things. Because when I'm saying evolution, I'm meaning the rare mutations. When they say evolution, creation, even creation myths, because you can see here that he misunderstood what I said, but when he says evolution, he's thinking variation. And the variation is, of course, not from mutation, not from making mistakes. The variation is from existing information from the father and the mother that is shuffled and produces one child with one variation. Then it's shuffled again, produces another child with another variation. Different, it's a different 50% of both of the father and the mother each time a child or an animal is reproduced. So they're saying that the variation, which is the shuffling of the information from the father and the mother, they're saying that's evolution because they're calling that change. In their mind, any change is evolution. That's what they understand evolution to be. In my mind, evolution is very, very rare mistakes, copying errors that are very rarely beneficial. And in order for evolution to occur, for me, is to have these very rare beneficial mutations add up in the population billions and billions and billions and billions of times over, these rare ones that hardly ever happen, or you can make the case that they never happen, but let's just say that they hardly ever happen. Because if you change one thing, you're going to change another thing. Because you mess with the DNA, you're not only just changing one thing, you're changing a whole bunch of things. So any mistake is bad. We've lost a lot of our genetic makeup since Neanderthals. Neanderthals had a much larger genome than what we have today. So we're only getting worse. We're only losing our genetic information. We're not getting better. But evolution depends on these very rare mistakes to make one thing change into another. But in the mind of an evolutionist, they're seeing any variation is evolution. And so all these variations of dog, they're thinking, well, this dog one day, one of these dog lineages is going to fly, or one of these dog lineages is going to go swimming and become a whale or something. That's what they're thinking. Because the same thing with Darwin, he was thinking, well, if it changes a little in a little bit amount of time, maybe with a lot of time, it's going to change a lot. That's what they're thinking in their mind. But the fact of the matter is that variation is not evolution. Variation is from existing information from the father and mother that mutations are only going to destroy. They're not going to make it evolve or change into something better. But this is why they're so confused. This is what Dan said. Look what Dan says. Looks like you agree that the YEC, most recent common ancestor calculations, cannot be correct because I'm saying the mechanism for evolution is rare. And in his mind, variation is evolution. In my mind, variation is what accounts for all the variation that we do see of all the different kinds of cats and dogs and animals, which is not evolution. He's thinking it's evolution. So he's thinking that the calculation can't be correct because the mutations are too rare to cause a change. No, the change is from existing information. The change is from information that's already in the father and the mother. It's just shuffled different. And, you can look at people, they look similar lots of times because they have similar information, but it's never exactly the same unless it's a genetic twin. And this is how we know that it's different. It's 50%. I mean, if you study genetics, you study your own genetics, you're going to find that you have about 50% from your mother. Your genetic makeup is about 50% of your mother and 50% from your father. It could vary a little bit, but that's what you are. You are half of what your father is and half of what your mother is. That's what you are. Your sister, your brother is half of your mother and father, but it's not the same half of the father and it's not the same half of the mother. That's what causes the variation, and that's from existing information, and it's not evolution. You're going to have variation of humans, but you're never going to be something other than what you have information to be, because there's no mechanism for evolution, because mistakes that are beneficial are very, very rare. And of course, they're going to cause more trouble than not. But in the mind of the evolutionist, he's looking at variation. That's why this other guy kept on saying that you're confusing the somatic mutations with the germline mutation. That's why he said that, is because he thinks I'm thinking that mistakes in our genome or my genome are being passed on from the somatic mutations. But if the germline mutations that passed on, I'm going to put words in my mouth. That didn't come through because that was, I didn't put the sound on. Anyways, because they're thinking that any change in the germline, is evolution. They're equating that to evolution. In fact, that's the definition of the evolution, is change. But this change, the variation that we do see, is not from rare mistakes, copy and errors. The change that we do see, the variation that we do see in dogs and everything, and cats, is from existing information, not from mistakes. Of course, there's mistakes in there that's being passed on through the germline, but that's not what causes the majority of the variation. Of course, it does cause, the different colored eyes, different color hair, and different stuff like that. But it's not changing. It's not changing a human being from not being a human being anymore. So they're confusing change, the variation. Sure, some of it is from rare mistakes. Some of it that's being passed on, but it's not changing who we are. The majority of the variation that we see is from existing information, and especially with animals, because they reproduce more, and they have harsh environments that they have to deal with, and they respond to the environment that they're in. But that's why they think there's evolution, is because they're looking at any change, any variation as being evolution. They're describing it, variation, as being evolution. That's why Dan said, looks like you agree that the most recent common ancestor calculations can't be correct. It's because he's thinking that I'm relying on very rare mutations to cause all the variation that we see, when he doesn't understand that variation is caused from existing information, or didn't think about it, or whatever. That's why he said what he said. Because the calculations are correct, because there's a lot of variation since in 5,000 years. There's a lot of variation in animals and variation in people too. But that variation is from existing information with some mutations, some mistakes being passed on, but it's not going to affect the what the human is. I mean, you could have humans in the different colored eye and different colored hair that could go out of existence, and then you're going to have some other mutation, but they're still being humans. They'll still be humans. It's not going to change or alter what the human is. But in the eyes of Charles Darwin, he's thinking that the variation is evolution, and that with a little bit of time, you have a little bit of variation. With more time, you have more variation. So he's thinking, well, that must mean there's a lot of time for a lot of variation, and that he describes as evolution, thinking that we all came from a common ancestor. The Luca, the most recent common ancestor of evolution, is Luca, some kind of amoeba or something. So from that, you have to have very rare mutations, and it's going to cause all the life forms that we see, even though all the life forms that we see are suffering entropy, including especially humans. We're suffering from genetic entropy. And that's a fact, because Neanderthals had a much larger genome, which accounted for their stronger frame, better eyesight, better hearing, larger brain, and it's the genome that accounted for all that, which we do not have anymore, because we're quote unquote modern humans that have suffered genetic entropy for 5,000 years. That's why our genome is smaller, and that's why we're losing function in that's why we can't see straight sometimes. We can't smell as good. We can't smell things as good. We can't hear as good. We can't think as good, because of the genetic entropy. And that's a fact. But evolution, in order for evolution to happen, you have to have these rare mistakes cause viable change. But this viable change from making mistakes is not going to ever happen. Viable functional change, because we're suffering from genetic entropy, obviously it's not happening. So it never did happen, because there's never a case for rare mistakes to write information that's not there to cause things to become other things, all different life forms. It's just not possible, because the change we do is from existing information. Anyway, so much for that diatribe. Long, long thing. Anyways, I hope people can see and evolutionists can understand that it's just not happening. There is no mechanism for evolution. So this is Creation Myth said that. He quotes me. Looks like you agree, the most recent common ancestor, because you're thinking that I think that the mechanism for change, for variation, is rare. No, the mechanism for variation is shuffling 50% of the father's DNA and the mother's DNA that causes a variation, that causes, especially from the beginning, caused a lot of variation, especially at the beginning. So that's why cats became a lot of different cats, and once they isolated into their niche, they had more variety, or more, they specialized in different things. And that's why there's varieties of cats and dogs and such, because they separated early on. And humans were supposed to separate too. And it was only because of the Tower of Babel that humans separated and became different nations early on. But we got to keep this in mind when we're explaining to the evolution. Make sure he understands what we're talking about, because in his mind, evolution is variation. In our minds, my mind, variation is not from evolution. It's not from making rare mistakes. Evolution doesn't exist because the rare mistakes aren't going to evolve anything. They're going to make some changes in color, hair, color eye, whatever, color skin, might make some changes, give you spots on your face and whatever. But they're not going to cause evolution. It's not enough change. Rare mistakes being selected for, which are very rare, is not going to cause evolution, because it's not making anything a whole lot better. It's not going to transform. Kids used to play with Transformers. It's not going to transform, and then you got the Pikachu and stuff. That stuff transforms. You're not going to have a transformation from very rare mistakes, because we're not getting better. We're losing our information. we're not gaining information. We're not becoming better. We're becoming worse because of genetic entropy. So that's why Dan said our calculations can't be correct because it's too rare to cause the variation that we see. But the problem is that these rare mutations are not causing the variation that we see. The variation that we see is from existing information. So if some evolution can understand that, that would be good. And even creationists. Creationists have to understand that too. The variation is from existing information. Very rare mistakes are not going to cause evolution. They're not going to transform anything. It'll make it look different. It'll warp it. You have warped frogs. You have warped animals, warped frogs, warped faces, whatever. But you're not making anything better. There might be certain advantages. The give and take, there's always, with everything you lose, there's always a gain. So if you lose your hands, then you can't be handcuffed, With everything you lose, there's a gain. But it doesn't make it evolution. It doesn't mean that things are evolving. Because the variation that we see is from existing information, so you cannot call that change evolution. As simple as that. So the only possible mechanism for evolution is even rare. It's extremely rare. And the variation that we see is from existing information that's already there. We don't need mistakes to cause the variation that we see, Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal. So that's good enough for there. God bless everybody. Take care. And let me see. Hope everybody has a great week or the rest of the week. And God bless everybody and take care. I don't mean to harp, but this is so very important for people to understand. It's because if you show the evolutionist that the only thing that he can rely on to cause all the variation that he thinks is occurring is from very rare mistakes. The variation that creationists see is from existing information, and that change is not from very rare mistakes. Even though very rare mistakes are in those changes, it's not those very rare mutations that are causing all the variation that we see. It might seem a little bit complicated and repeating myself over and over, but you have to understand the difference. And you can refute any evolutionist anytime, any day of the week. So God bless everybody. Take care, even if it's Dr. Dan. Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal. All right, God bless everybody. Take care. Signing out this time for good, once and for all. Take care.